Before refrigerators and modern food technology, Native Americans mastered incredible ways to keep meat fresh for months, even years. And these methods weren't just clever survival tricks, they were preservation techniques that were so good that some of them still work better than our modern tricks. Let's dig in. Let's talk about smoking meat. And no, not the kind that gets you weird looks from your neighbors. Native Americans discovered that smoke wasn't just good for sending signals or making their clothes smell like a campfire, it was nature's own food preservative. The genius part? Smoke does double duty. It sucks all the moisture out of the meat while coating it with natural compounds that tell bacteria to take a hike. Archaeological evidence suggests some Native American smokehouses were so well designed they could preserve meat for up to 2 years. That's longer than most of us keep leftovers in our modern fridges. They'd build these special smoke huts where they'd hang strips of meat over slowly smoldering fires. The key word here is slowly. This wasn't your typical backyard barbecue where Uncle Bob cranks up the heat and turns everything into charcoal. Speaking of preservation methods, different tribes had their own signature smoking techniques. Some preferred using specific types of wood, hickory, maple, or cedar, each adding its own unique flavor. It's like the original food seasoning, except this one also keeps your dinner from spoiling. A study of preserved Native American smoking techniques showed that the combination of dehydration and smoke compounds reduced bacterial growth by up to 90%. Now that's what I call effective pest control. The real magic happened when they mastered the art of jerky making. And I'm not talking about those overpriced strips you buy at gas stations. Native Americans were making jerky before it was cool, and they didn't need any of those weird preservatives that you can't pronounce. They'd slice meat into thin strips, thin enough that you could almost read a smoke signal through them, and lay them out to dry in the sun. Modern food scientists have studied these traditional drying techniques and found that properly dried meat can retain up to 80% of its original nutritional value. That's better than some of the processed foods sitting in our pantries right now. They knew exactly which meats worked best for each method. Big game like bison and elk got the smoking treatment because, let's face it, you try carrying an entire bison around without preserving it first. Smaller game like rabbit and turkey were perfect for drying into jerky because they were already portion-sized and ideal for those long hunting trips. It's like they invented the first travel-sized meals minus the plastic packaging and questionable ingredients. These methods weren't just effective, they were practical. No electricity, no fancy equipment, just careful observation of what worked and what didn't. Native Americans noticed that meat dried better on windy days, so they'd often set up their drying racks in breezy areas. They also figured out that smoking meat in cooler weather worked better than in summer heat, probably because nobody likes working around a hot fire when it's already scorching outside. But it gets interesting when some tribes get creative with their preservation spots. They build special platforms high up in trees to keep their drying meat away from hungry animals. Picture yourself climbing up to check on your food storage only to find a bear having an all-you-can-eat buffet. Not exactly the dinner guest you were expecting. Some tribes even developed specific roles for their best meat preservers, kind of like having a master chef, except this chef's specialty was making sure the whole village had food for the winter. And what's fascinating is that these techniques were so effective that early European settlers actually adopted many of them. That's right, while they might have turned their noses up at some Native American customs, they couldn't argue with success when it came to keeping meat edible for months on end. In fact, some of these smoking and drying techniques are still used today by artisanal meat producers who want to avoid artificial preservatives. Speaking of preservation methods, this whole smoking and drying business was just the beginning. Those clever Native Americans had another trick up their sleeves. Remember those fancy protein bars at the health food store that cost more than your lunch? Well, Native Americans invented something way better centuries ago. While smoke and sun did their part in preserving meat, pemmican was the real champion of survival food, and it didn't even need a fancy wrapper or marketing campaign. The recipe sounds simple enough. Take some dried meat, pound it into powder, mix it with melted fat, maybe throw in some berries if you're feeling fancy. But here's the kicker. This stuff could last for decades. Not years, decades. We're talking about food that could outlast your mortgage payments. Making pemmican wasn't just throwing ingredients together like your aunt's mystery casserole. Native Americans perfected this process through generations of trial and error. First, they'd pick the right meat, usually bison, elk, or deer. These animals had the perfect balance of lean meat and fat, unlike that skinny rabbit that would turn your pemmican into something resembling dried shoe leather. Each tribe had their own special techniques passed down through generations, much like your grandmother's secret recipes, except these recipes could save your life in the wilderness. A typical pemmican recipe used a ratio of 50% powdered meat to 50% rendered fat. That might sound like a cardiologist's nightmare today, but this ratio wasn't random. Native Americans figured out that this exact balance created the perfect seal against air and moisture, which are basically food preservation's worst enemies. Modern food scientists have confirmed that this ratio maximizes both preservation time and nutritional value. Those ancient food experts knew their stuff. Recent studies have shown that properly made pemmican can maintain its nutritional value for up to 50 years when stored correctly. The process was like an assembly line before assembly lines existed. While some people dried and pounded the meat, others rendered the fat until it was pure enough to prevent spoilage. They discovered that using kidney fat or sweat worked better than regular body fat. It had a higher melting point that kept pemmican solid even during summer travels. And we're not talking about small-scale production here. Some tribes could process thousands of pounds of meat in a single hunting season. 1 pound of pemmican packed about 3,500 calories. That's like eating 3 large pizzas, except this actually kept you alive on long hunting trips instead of just making you regret your life choices the next morning. Warriors and hunters could survive for weeks with just a small bag of pemmican and some water. Try doing that with your protein shake. Historical records show that Native American runners could cover up to 50 miles a day, fueled primarily by pemmican, making modern energy gels look pretty weak in comparison. The true genius of pemmican wasn't just its staying power, it was its versatility. You could eat it as is, cook it into a stew, or melt it into a sort of prehistoric energy drink. Some tribes even developed different recipes for different seasons. Winter pemmican might include more fat for extra calories, while summer versions often included dried berries for extra vitamins and better taste. Archaeological evidence suggests that some tribes developed over 20 different pemmican variations, each designed for specific purposes or seasons. Trade records from the 1800s show that pemmican became so valuable it was literally used as currency among some tribes. Imagine paying your bills with food that doesn't go bad. And when European fur traders discovered pemmican, they went absolutely nuts for it. Soon, entire pemmican trading networks sprang up. Some Native American tribes became the equivalent of prehistoric food manufacturing giants, producing thousands of pounds of pemmican for trade. Historical documents from the Hudson's Bay Company show that some trading posts would store up to 20,000 pounds of pemmican at a time. But here's something most history books don't tell you. Pemmican actually sparked a war. No joke, the Pemmican War of 1814 to 1816 started when the governor of the Red River Colony tried to stop pemmican exports. It turns out people get really angry when you mess with their food supply, especially when that food supply has kept their families alive for generations. While pemmican revolutionized food preservation and trade, sometimes you needed to store fresh cooked meat for shorter periods. Before the days of plastic containers with lids that mysteriously vanish into the same dimension as missing socks, Native Americans had already mastered the art of leftover storage. Their secret weapon? A combination of clay pots and animal fat that work better than those expensive containers you're still waiting for your neighbor to return. The basic concept was brilliantly simple. Take your cooked meat, pack it into a clay pot or bark container, then seal the top with a thick layer of rendered animal fat. It's like putting a lid on your leftovers, except this lid actually kept bacteria out instead of just making your fridge look more organized. Recent archaeological studies have shown that this method could keep meat edible for up to 6 months. Try getting those results with your modern-day meal prep containers. The clay pots themselves were engineering masterpieces. Native American potters didn't just slap some mud together and call it a day. They carefully selected specific types of clay that could withstand temperature changes without cracking. Archaeological evidence from various sites shows that these storage vessels were often treated with special mixtures of plant resins and oils that made them more resistant to moisture. One study of preserved pots found that some tribes even developed a type of natural waterproofing that rivals modern ceramic glazes. But the magic happened with the fat seal. They discovered that certain animal fats worked better than others. Bison and bear fat were particularly prized because they had higher melting points, meaning your meat wouldn't start leaking during the first warm day of spring. tests on recreated storage methods have shown that a properly rendered fat seal could reduce bacterial growth by up to 95% compared to unsealed containers. That's better than some modern preservative methods. Some tribes took this storage game to the next level by burying their fat-sealed containers underground. Smart move. The constant cool temperature of the earth acted like a natural refrigerator. Soil samples from ancient storage sites have revealed that these underground spots maintain temperatures between 35 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Modern root cellars use the exact same principle, just with fewer clay pots and more canned green beans. The variety of foods they preserve this way would put your meal prep to shame. Besides regular meat, they preserve delicacies like beaver tail. Yes, that was considered the bacon of its time. Everyone wanted it. Bear fat was especially valued, not just for sealing, but for eating too. One container of preserved bear fat could provide enough calories to feed a family for a week. Talk about efficient packaging. These storage methods weren't just about preservation, they were about survival. Written accounts from early European traders describe entire communities making it through harsh winters thanks to their stored meat supplies. One fascinating record from 1792 mentions a village that survived a 3-month hunting drought using nothing but their preserved meat stores. The trader noted that the meat was as fresh as if newly killed. High praise from someone who probably expected to find something resembling beef jerky. Different regions developed their own variations based on local resources. Coastal tribes often used fish oil for sealing, while plains tribes preferred bison fat. Some groups in what's now the American Southwest even developed special clay pots with ridged rims that created a better seal with the fat layer. Archaeological finds suggest these designed vessels could extend preservation time by an additional 2 months compared to standard pots. But here's a fact that might make you feel better about your own cooking experiments. Even Native Americans sometimes got it wrong. Archaeologists have found plenty of failed storage pots, complete with cracks and improper seals. They learned from their mistakes, though, constantly refining their techniques until they had it down to a science. It's like your grandmother always said, practice makes perfect, especially when your winter survival depends on it. Speaking of storage solutions, while fat-sealed pots work great for regular meats, sometimes you needed to think bigger. Much bigger. Got a big haul from your latest hunt? Before modern freezers came along, Native Americans faced this challenge regularly. Their solution? They turned the earth itself into one giant refrigerator. Modern archaeologists have uncovered thousands of these ancient storage pits across North America, some large enough to hold meat from several full-grown elk. Talk about thinking big. The science behind these underground meat lockers was surprisingly sophisticated. At about 6 to 8 feet deep, the ground maintains a steady temperature of around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. That's warmer than your fridge, but cool enough to significantly slow down meat spoilage. Recent studies of these ancient storage methods have shown that properly constructed pits could keep meat edible for up to 3 months in warmer seasons. Not bad for a hole in the ground. The construction of these pits wasn't just dig and dump. Native Americans lined them with specific materials in carefully planned layers, like the world's most practical lasagna. First came a layer of grass or bark to prevent direct soil contact. Then they'd add alternating layers of meat and insulating materials. Archaeological evidence shows they often used particular types of grass and leaves known for their natural antimicrobial properties. One excavated pit in the Midwest contained traces of sweet grass, which we now know contains natural compounds that help prevent bacterial growth. In colder regions, these pits transformed into natural deep freezers. The ground would freeze solid, perfectly preserving whatever was stored inside. Some tribes in what's now Canada developed a technique of creating ice layers between meat layers, basically inventing the chest freezer about 800 years early. When European explorers first encountered these frozen meat caches, they were amazed to find perfectly preserved game that had been stored for months. But location was everything. Like modern real estate, it was all about location, location, location. Tribes would carefully choose spots for their storage pits based on soil type, drainage patterns, and even wind exposure. They knew that sandy soil drained better than clay. Nobody wanted their winter meat supply sitting in a puddle, and that north-facing slopes stayed cooler. Some archaeological sites have revealed entire pit neighborhoods, dozens of storage pits carefully arranged based on the local landscape. The size of these pits could get pretty impressive. The largest discovered so far could hold up to 2,000 pounds of meat. That's like parking a small car underground, except this one you could eat later. And yes, someone actually calculated that. A study of storage pit volumes across different regions showed that northern tribes typically built larger pits, probably because the colder climate meant they could store meat longer. But it wasn't just about digging holes. These pits needed maintenance and management. Tribes developed complex systems for rotating their meat supplies, kind of like how we check expiration dates today. Except their version didn't involve squinting at tiny printed numbers. They used marker sticks to track storage times and had specific rules about when to open which pits. Some tribes even appointed pit keepers, basically prehistoric inventory managers who kept track of everything stored underground. You might wonder about unwanted visitors. After all, a pit full of meat sounds like an all-you-can-eat buffet for local wildlife. Native Americans had that figured out too. They'd often cover pit openings with heavy stones and build special markers that were obvious to humans but not attractive to animals. Some tribes even planted certain types of plants around their storage areas that naturally repelled wildlife. Pretty clever way to keep the neighborhood bears from raiding your winter stash. Of course, sometimes things didn't go according to plan. Archaeological evidence suggests that about 1 in every 10 pits failed due to various reasons: flooding, animal intrusion, or improper sealing. But considering they were working without modern technology, that's a pretty impressive success rate. It's better than my track record with keeping leftover takeout edible in the fridge. While underground storage worked great for keeping meat cold, some tribes developed even more interesting preservation methods. In fact, their next technique might make your stomach turn a bit. But trust me, it's a fascinating process that turns simple fish into a delicacy that would last for months. You might turn your nose up at the idea of eating controlled rot, but fermentation was one of Native Americans' most brilliant preservation techniques. Before you say gross, remember that cheese is basically fermented milk, and you probably ate some on your pizza last night. The difference? Native Americans applied the same principle to fish and meat, creating preserved foods that could last through the harshest winters. The process started with catching fish, usually salmon or other fatty fish, that were perfect for fermentation. These fish would be buried in special pits lined with grasses and leaves, then left to ferment under carefully controlled conditions. The science behind this is fascinating. Beneficial bacteria would break down the fish while preventing harmful bacteria from growing. Modern microbiologists have studied these traditional fermentation pits and found they created the perfect environment for good bacteria, maintaining a pH level between 4.2 and 4.8, exactly what you need for safe fermentation. But this wasn't just a random burial. Different tribes developed specific techniques based on their local climate and available ingredients. Coastal tribes often added seaweed to their fermentation pits, unknowingly introducing natural compounds that helped preserve the fish even better. Recent studies have shown that these seaweed additions provided iodine and other minerals that actually enhance the preservation process. Who needs fancy food additives when you've got seaweed? The timing had to be perfect too. Too short, and the fermentation wouldn't protect the food properly. Too long, and, well, let's just say you'd have something that even your uncle who eats everything wouldn't touch. Through generations of trial and error, tribes developed precise timing systems. They'd check the pits regularly, looking for specific signs that the fermentation was complete, kind of like checking if your sourdough bread has risen enough, except with more interesting smells. Archaeological evidence suggests some tribes could store fermented fish for up to a year. That's pretty impressive considering modern food preservation methods often struggled to keep fish fresh for more than a few days. One excavated storage pit in Alaska contained traces of fermented fish that scientists estimate could have fed a family of 6 for an entire winter season. Talk about meal prep. Speaking of cold storage, Native Americans in northern regions developed some seriously cool techniques. Pun absolutely intended. Ice freezing wasn't just throwing meat into a snowbank and hoping for the best. They developed sophisticated methods for cutting and storing ice blocks, creating what were essentially the first freezer lockers. Some tribes would alternate layers of snow and meat, creating frozen food packages that would stay preserved until spring. But they figured out how to slice frozen meat so thin it was actually edible without thawing. Using special tools made from bone and stone, they could shave frozen fish and meat into pieces thin enough to eat immediately. This technique required incredible skill. One wrong move and you'd be trying to gnaw on a frozen chunk instead of enjoying paper-thin slices. Modern analysis of these tools shows they could create slices as thin as 1/16 of an inch. That's sashimi-grade precision without modern knives. Temperature management was crucial. Northern tribes built special ice houses using snow blocks and insulating materials like fur and grass. These structures could maintain temperatures below freezing even as outside temperatures fluctuated. Studies of traditional ice house designs have shown they could keep temperatures steady at around 28 degrees Fahrenheit for months at a time. That's more consistent than some modern freezers, but it wasn't all serious business. Some tribes held competitions to see who could slice the thinnest pieces of frozen fish, kind of like an ancient Iron Chef competition, except everyone's fingers were probably numb. Archaeological evidence has uncovered special ceremonial slicing tools that were likely used in these events, decorated with intricate carvings and made from premium materials. From burying fish to master the art of fermentation to turning ice and snow into nature's freezer, Native Americans demonstrated an incredible understanding of food science. These preservation methods weren't just about surviving, they were about thriving, creating nutrient-rich foods that could sustain communities through the toughest times.